Okay, this video is, of course, iamever.org, and this is the Hebrew-based apologetics. And an example, a good example, would be from a book by Grudem. It's a very large, well-produced, widely distributed, successful, and I have a page marked. Of course, Landmark Media Production, that's probably is a global leader in hermeneutics. You can't have apologetics without hermeneutics, but that's a good website. But I've covered this before, but would like to use it to also show the usefulness of people who talk about King James only, but you don't find a lot of King James users. But on page 287, he says, "It became without form and void." He calls it an alternative, but doubtful. Now, when you're doing apologetics, your argument is, so what he's done is he's classified. He says alternative. So now the original Hebrew text, ha-yah that is, has now become, he's calling it an alternative. And he's saying it's doubtful. So it's filled with doubt. It's a doubtful translation. So right now we're just arguing from emotion. You can see where it's just a matter of presenting the original text, ha-yah, as now an alternative, which I was taught that in hermeneutics, that eventually the truth as we know it would be presented, that is spun or twisted by others as an alternative, when in reality the things we say and the talk is the alternative. The text is not the alternative, and it's not doubt-filled. But let's look at why. And again, those who use the King James Bible, not those who tout King James only, but the users of it. This is some type of friend of mine, Dale Crumby, gave me this. He's a Bible scholar and user, but here in Psalm 118:22, well, there's Landmark Media Productions again. That just keeps coming up all the time. But you'll notice in this verse, it says, the stone which the builders rejected is become the headstone of the corner. So here, become is the translation in Psalm 118:22. So it's become there. And then, of course, we have another language in the New Testament. And again, there's a card. And so in Matthew chapter 21, verse 42, Jesus quotes that text in Psalm, and it says, "Did you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." So in Matthew 21:42, it's translated become. And then again in Mark 12 verse 10, it says become, and then there's a note here in the bottom cross-referencing to Psalm 118:22. So Mark 12:10 has become, but again, this is all English. It's not, we don't have a determinate, except for the fact that ha-yah here is the Hebrew, and the inspired translation, that is the Koine text, has the word genomai. And oh my, I don't want to lose my space here. So Matthew 21:42, Mark 12:10, and here we have genomai. which is always become in the Koine text. There's another word for be. Said Amy, a form of Amy. This would be the be form of the verb. So in the Koine text, we have a verb for become and we have a verb for be, stative. And in the inspired text, genomai is used for ha-ya. So Wayne Grudem didn't demonstrate and support that ha-ya as become was an alternative. He just simply called it that, accused it, categorized as that, and he did not show any reason why it should be filled with doubt. And using the English text, a King James user would have noticed become and become in both the Old and the New. And if a King James user asked, well, why does it say was in Genesis 1:2? That's because it says was in the Koine Old Testament, which is not a product of inspiration. So that was just a translation from Greek or into Greek, but it was not a text that was inspired. So we do have a determinant, and it can happen to anyone. It's just if you really want to do apologetics, a good systematic theologian, which is probably the broadest expression, by the time you get to systematic, you've already been trained in hermeneutics, you've been trained in language, and you have the ability to give a rationale, which is apologetics, the fruit of hermeneutics, and languages are the tools. Well, by the time you come to systematic theology, if any of that's broken down, you'll be forced to say things, and this is bias. He's just biased here. He's wanting to follow whatever trend is out there, but being trendy is not a thing that results in peace and consonance for the hearers or the readers. It leaves people in somewhat of a flummox, especially knowing that people cannot initially perceive from a point of view from which the contradiction would disappear. We have to be taught out from contradictions. So here's an example, but use your King James, be a user of it, and then when you need to go and find a determinant, you can just look that up very easily, and that way you can find out why people would say things like alternative or doubtful without any support. So it's not a fault, it's we all have source bias, and then of course we avoid sources. So in his case, he didn't want to be as supportive of ha-ya being become, nor do the labor and the work to find a determinant so that it would not be just merely a contradiction. So that's enough. That's a good example. This is IamEver.org. It's apologetic and outreach ministry of Landmark Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Arkansas.